Hi Witchlings, welcome back to my channel. It's Chaotic Witch Aunt, and today I am here talking about occult and witchy hot takes with a very good friend of mine, Nike, who is going to share a little bit about themselves.
Hi guys, so I'm Nike. I'm the warrior witch, Nike, kind of everywhere. I started practicing a couple years ago, but before that was sort of on and off. And now I make witchy content online. My main stuff is like astrology, as like personal stuff, but my channel is just sort of broad witchy stuff. And I met Frankie online and I love her very much. She's very cool.
Thanks. So I guess to kind of start us off with talking about occult and witchy hot takes, I guess what exactly is a hot take? What do you consider a hot take?
Oh, that depends. It depends on how controversial it is, but generally just a hot take is like something that needs to be said that is going to make at least a couple of people upset.
Yeah, I would say that's my definition of it too. I think there are certain things where people are like, hot take, and then they say something really, really simple, and I'm like,
hot take, tarot cards are divination.
Hot take, pendulum swing. And everyone's like, oh my god, you're so revolutionary. And I'm like, but yeah, so starting off, what is a hot take that you have that you think everyone should have?
I've said this on my own content a lot, so people that know me won't be surprised, but I think that science belongs in witchcraft, and if you are leaving science out of it, you are doing yourself a disservice, because science and witchcraft absolutely have overlap, and anybody who says that they have to be completely separate, or that any scientific stuff cannot be magic, is obviously, one, not studied up on history, but two, they don't understand magic in the first place.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, especially coming from someone who I consider quantum physics in my practice and like string theory and energy. Like, we are manipulating energy, and energy is documented in science. So in order to understand the energy we are manipulating and working with, we have to understand how energy behaves in our realm or our reality. And we need to understand how, like, our limitations and the limitations of the energy around us in our reality. We can't, and I said this before and I got a little bit of heat because I said you can't levitate objects.
Well, yeah, oh god, yeah, people taking it way too far into like Harry Potter for sure, being like, I can levitate or I can fly, and I'm like, you're a liar.
I'm like, someone gave one example where I was like, okay, and they were like, there is like Buddhist monks who would levitate, and I'm like, see, I can kind of believe that if you hit that level of like dedication. They were like, you would levitate off the ground.
Right, but that's like this close to like pure enlightenment kind of stuff. Like that's not something that some 20-year-old's gonna do in their bedroom living in the middle of the city doing, you know, a day job and everything. That's straight up like monk living in a cave for 50 years doing nothing but meditation every day, like.
And they were like, and they gave me that example, and I'm like, yeah, I can definitely believe that because they're monks. And they've done this for maybe like 20 years or more. But if you come to me as a 15-year-old and you're like, I can levitate an object, I'm going to be like, okay, video, please. Which is different than like, I guess like, yeah, show me. Crystals falling off the hand. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, like subtle, it's like subtle energy stuff. Like, I do believe to some extent about, like, being able to manipulate, like, incense smoke and maybe, like, a candle flame. Maybe being able to, like, make an object get knocked over. Heavier objects, I'm more skeptical about, especially if it's on your hand. The subtle little tilt in your hand of just trying to hold it steady could knock something over, but the stuff that's harder to manipulate, if it's, and you know, you'd want to do experiments on it and everything, but you'd have to be careful about like watching it with airflow, not sitting anywhere near it, not concentrating, and then doing stuff with it, and you know, understanding how subtle manipulations in the air can shift things. I mean, it'd really have to be like rigorous tests, but I do believe that there can be some effect on those because smoke and flame are such sort of like, in a way, intangible sort of things, versus knocking over a rock is so much heavier and harder. The rock thing I would find more difficult to believe, and I would only believe it if it was on a flat, even surface that you were not touching. On a hand, I think is more often just you're trying to hold it steady, but the human body cannot hold perfectly still. So there's going to be subtle movements, and subtle movements in your hand will eventually just knock it over.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people could even argue that those subtle movements are a form of energy kind of moving, like, because you're subconsciously moving those muscles, but that's over here.
It's a whole other
It's a whole other thing. The other thing is I feel like we as witches we already have a connection to the elements. And when those elements are contained, they become easier to kind of connect with and manipulate. But if you get to if you go out to a wildfire and you're down, it's not going to work.
Yeah, no, big stuff like that, absolutely not. But in terms of energy being a whole thing, I describe it to my non-witchy friends as they've done scientific experiments on, 2 plants, same food, same environment, same everything. One plant they'll scream and yell at, and one plant they'll say nice things to, and the one that they scream and yell at withers and sometimes dies. There are effects that you can measure. We don't know exactly what they are, but there is something to it. There are ways that the energy changes. There's the music experiments that everybody's familiar with, but there is something to that. So scientists understand that at the very minimum, which I think ties both of ours together, but we know that energy affects things, so very much it's a measurable thing, and I do definitely think that we have some control over energy to be able to manipulate stuff.
I completely agree. My witchy take that I think everyone should have is the idea that all magic has a price. Which I found out that idea in essence is partially in chaos magic, like the butterfly effect. Because I was reading Condensed Chaos by Phil Hine last night, because this is what I do in my free time, I read. And he was talking about the butterfly effect and just letting your intent out into the void and the universe. And I was like, oh shit, that's something I already do. That's something where I already believe that I push my intent out. It's more like a ripple than a request. So I think a lot of people think you put your intent out and the universe finds it and brings it to you. I see it more as I push my intent out. It creates ripples in the pond. That ripples hits something specific. That specific comes back towards me. I see it a little bit more fluidly, not as structured, I guess. I don't see it as, except if I'm working with saints, because you petition the saints and they're like, here you go. And I'm like, oh shit. Well, that's spirit work. That's you can be way more direct. But if I'm just doing a spell with my own energy, a candle, and I'm like, cool, I'm going to do this. It's more like throwing a rock in a pond towards a general object than really just getting a letter, I guess. That's why you have to be specific with your spells, because you need to throw the rock in the right place and make sure the right things are written on it, and then the fish in the pond are like, here you go. That was an awful example.
Oh, I know what you mean. I would see it as there's a leaf a couple feet out in the water, and you need to throw the rock in the right way that brings the leaf to you. If it's a little to the left or a little to the right, the ripples will push the leaf further away from you. Yeah. Versus if you get just the right spot, it'll gently bring it towards you.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. But I think that a lot of people automatically see that kind of concept of all magic has a price, all magic has an effect, as something that makes witchcraft inherently negative, because the effects can be negative. That isn't to say that every time you cast a spell, you're inherently harming someone or taking something away from them. It's that it may affect others in ways that you don't know or don't understand. And that doesn't necessarily mean that in their life they weren't supposed to lose that at a certain point, or that it isn't part of a lesson they're supposed to learn. I think that we don't tempt and work with fate as much, I think, as some people believe. I don't think we're reweaving the pattern of fate. I think we're working within its lines to achieve our desires. And I think a lot of people are like, well, when you fuck with fate, and I'm like, are we though? Because if the universe you're really not supposed to have something, it's not gonna happen. I have had full-blown spells get blocked by the entities I work with saying, yeah, that's not, you're not doing that. But maybe that's just me.
It's not for you this time. Yeah. No, I definitely believe that. Like, I don't think we can manipulate fate very much, and it goes into my beliefs about astrology, because some people are like, well, how much of it is fate, and are we destined, like, you know, when this transit hits, does it mean it will always be this way? And I see it as more of working with the energy of circumstance, where things are set up correctly. You know, if a friend offers you a job, you don't have to take the job, but it is a good opportunity to get that job. So if you're looking for a job, you still have the choice to say, no, I don't want it, I don't want to take it. You have full choice over that decision, but all of the circumstances are set up around you to make that job come to you. But ultimately, you can choose not to have asked the friend to look for you. If they just brought it up on their own, you can just choose to say no. You can go to the interview, but then never accept from, you know, the place itself. You always have the choice the full way along. So definitely, like, fate is not something that you can just manipulate. And in terms of like the price stuff, I think that's also why I have a different view on baneful magic. I don't do a lot of it, but I have done some. But you know, people who are like, it could affect somebody else, it takes away their free will, it harms them. I'm like, listen, things that you consider to be good magic also affect other people. You know, if you do a job spell and you do a spell to get the job, it means that you are potentially taking a job away from somebody else who's a candidate. Money that would come to you is money that would go to somebody else in other circumstances. You know, all these things that you manifest or you do spell work for, it does still take from someone else. In the broader scheme, it would go somewhere else eventually if it doesn't go to you. So saying that I only do magic that does good and doesn't harm other people and doesn't affect other people is ridiculous, because everything you do is going to affect people, even in small, subtle ways. Even if it's not like bad, it still does something. So it's a little bit almost like egotistical to say that, well, I only do good magic because it doesn't affect other people. Fundamentally means you don't understand the consequences in the price that you are paying, not just in like what you give as an offering or whatever, but the price out in the universe towards other people for any kind of magic.
My kind of go-to, like my list of things that I personally don't fuck with, or I don't fuck with often because it has a bigger chance of backfiring, is like love, free will to an extent. So that would be like, if someone doesn't want to do something and I'm trying to magically convince them to do something, and a lot of people are like, that's not ethical, and I'm like, well, what if it's getting them into therapy? What if it's yeah.
It definitely depends on circumstances.
And so I like, the one example of that is like, I was getting someone into therapy, or I was trying to convince them to go to therapy. So trying to get them to clean their room or be more amicable towards the people around them because they were harming people. And that was at the request of someone else. This wasn't like me doing it on people close to me. This was, I always almost always do a lot of my spells like domination magic, baneful magic for other people. But, and then the other one is the weather. I don't fuck with the weather, and I usually don't fuck with divine beings or try to cast against divine beings. And I know historically witches like cursed the gods all the time, and that's their prerogative, but you know, that's just not something I like doing. Not like it's gonna do anything, but I would prefer to be on the good side of most divine entities and just not be like, fuck you. That's just me in general. I guess the topic of love spells too is like, there's a lot of conversation of like, I saw someone say that like self-love spells are like baneful magic, and love spells are baneful magic because you're still manipulating free will. Yeah, stop, wait. And I was like, okay, so I respect this person's belief and I love them and they're a great friend to me, but at the same time, baneful means harm. If you do a self-love or love spell right, you're not harming yourself, you're pushing yourself. And I think a lot of people don't understand that magic in many ways and historically has been pushing people to do things. Like when we look at like the origin of domination magic, it comes from women who were underneath their husband's foot and needed to rely on them for everything. And if that husband found someone else, this woman would be without money, be without a job, etc., because that's how it was. A woman relied on her husband. So, of course, they used domination magic to keep their husband around, to keep him in love with them, because they needed it. They needed to. But when we're talking self-love spells, like, technically, are you, quote-unquote, manipulating yourself to love yourself? Maybe, if you do it a certain way. But
But that's a therapy technique. Like, so I have two thoughts on this. Like, I don't know who your friend is, so you may want to like cut this part out. But if you view self-love as domination and as baneful, I think you have a very poor view on self-love in general, like even just the mundane ways of loving yourself and of self-care. I think that shows a very harsh disconnect from how you're supposed to view yourself and how you're supposed to love yourself, because you are supposed to love yourself and care about yourself. But more broadly, self-love and like doing things for yourself and essentially like tricking yourself into being happier with who you are is a therapy technique. It's a big like fake it till you make it. Like it's a huge thing to sort of reroute your brain. You know, I did this to myself from experience. You know, if you're talking bad about yourself and you're always insulting yourself, being like, I'm so stupid, I'm so dumb, ha ha ha, even just in jokes, you have to change that. Yeah, it totally just gets into your brain. So I started changing it, and you know from when we've talked just, you know, in private, where I'll be like, I'm the greatest, I'm the best, I'm so amazing and everyone should love me. Like, it's a joke. It's supposed to be funny. I'm not actually that egotistical. I'm not actually saying you should love me. But, you know, the joke's saying how great you are, how cool you are, how beautiful you are. It will help slowly shift that. And that's, in a sense, dominating your own mind. So to say that it's domination is saying that therapy is bad. And I think that's a bad view to have on it.
Yeah, cause like my therapy is like very much confronting and changing thought patterns. Like that's cognitive behavioral therapy. And it was funny because they were like, you should go to therapy instead of doing that. I'm like, it's kind of the same thing. You're just, it really is. The other thing is just like love spells, I guess. The reason I don't fuck with love spells is not because I feel like I need consent. If someone comes to me, pays me $500 and is like, I want this person to fall in love with me, I'm going to give them the talk, which is, it's going to be like a genuine discussion of like, why do you want this? Why do you want this right now when you know it's not for you? Because that's kind of the conversation I think that needs to be had, not necessarily, oh, it's morally and ethically wrong to do that. It's not healthy. That's the bottom line. It's not good for the caster, because if you cast it and then down the line you find the love of your life and you still have this spell on you, this person can become obsessed with you. I've heard stories of that happening if we're really thinking about it. And I think that the ethics and the morals of the witch depend on the witch. So I'm not going to come, unless it comes to cultural appropriation and racism. I'm not going to come into your path and say you shouldn't be doing love spells because they're morally wrong. That's not my fucking business at all. In the same way that I hope no one comes into my space and tells me, you can't be cursing, you can't be hexing, you can't be doing domination magic because it's unethical. And I'm like, well, is it really unethical if I'm rebalancing the scales? Like if I'm hexing people who never were punished for what they did, or if I'm casting a domination spell to get the person to do something good for themselves, to get them out of a rut. Like what, where...
And someone's always going to have an issue with your morals too. Like I've been told that taking money for spell work and taking money for tarot and taking money for astrology is morally wrong. Like there's always going to be something. Right. Like I'm using my time, my energy. Yeah, it's a whole thing. But like someone's morals is always going to be different from yours. So as long as you respect that they're different, as long as they're not actively like hurting someone, they're not trying to do a death. And I've heard of people doing this, trying to do a death spell on someone because they said something mean to them once, or they heard a rumor. They don't even know if it's true. Like, oh yeah, jumping into death spells just because someone was a meanie one time. Yeah, definitely. Like, that's the only time where I'm like, that's a bad moral system. But that's less morals and more of like a poor mental health situation.
Yeah, okay, so another hot take, pro-hex doesn't mean you hex anyone who you feel like deserves it because they kind of treated you wrong. It means that you understand baneful magic, the history of baneful magic, and what a lot of people still use baneful magic for, not witches on the internet, witches off the internet, like what it is at its core, and say, you know what, I think this is okay. This is okay to me.
I view it like being a pacifist, where some people are pacifists and that's fine, they will never raise a hand, but you know what? I have actually physically fought people in order to defend myself, and I'm not afraid to do it again because I needed to do it in order to protect myself, in order to protect other people. Like, I've had to do it 2 or 3 times, unfortunately. Same goes for magic. If I need to defend myself magically, I am not afraid, and I'm not, like, above, doing baneful magic if the need arises. It sometimes is what is necessary in a situation, and if somebody else would resort to more pacifist means, that's fine for them, but they also can't judge me. Like, if somebody's physically getting in my face and threatening to beat me up, I have the right to defend myself, and it would be shitty for somebody to tell me that I would be wrong for physically defending myself.
As my teacher says, because I'm taking a 13-month course called Awakening the Witch with a specific teacher. And he said, a curse will be the last thing to leave my lips, but I will not hesitate to throw it. That's my take on it. I really, that's the last thing I will do to you. Hexes, curses, jinxes, it is the last thing I will approach. I will approach communication. I will approach bindings. I will approach banishings. I will approach legal things before I do that to you. And then when I do, I go for the jugular. I don't play pretty, I don't sit and be like, you're gonna stub your toe every day for the rest of your life, which is fun as an annoyance, but I usually go for, I talk to my, friends who do dark magic, and I'm like, yo, so I need some assistance with this, and they're like, here's the materials, here's a sigil, don't fuck with it, just do it the way I gave it to you, and I'm like, thanks. My thing is, I incorporate, kind of like a tripwire baneful magic into my protections, and I was talking to a friend, the other day, and it was just, a conversation of, we've both had people think that, people on the internet that we've barely had any interaction with think that we hexed them. And I'm like, or, hear me out. You walked into my space trying to get, information on me or crossed a boundary, and you got hit with one of my, you got hit with something because I have a literal, what some people would consider a curse as protection. And if they come in and they try something against me, it's oh, here you go. And I know for a fact that some of these people tried shit against me first, and then we're oh, they did baneful magic on me. And I'm like, no, you just...
I have a friend who works with Bast, or Bast, I don't know how it's pronounced. And they have a little astral realm with Bast, and they have this obelisk and everything. And one of the, I don't know if they were a teenager or just a really immature novice, but one of the novices that we encountered decided that they were going to try to sneak into his astral realm, and he does a lot of astral work. And so it was basically the obelisk came down and really just dropped on this person. He was like, yeah, that's what they get. I don't, what am I supposed to do? They chose to invade my realm. My realm fought back. The person got really upset, and he was like, what are you expecting? You invaded. I have defenses. What are you talking about?
Don't fucking invade a witch's personal space. If you are mine is if you intend to throw any negativity at me, any harm towards me or my family, all you have to do is try to cast an eye on me. And I'm cool, you're taken care of. I don't, and it's funny because people are I'm gonna hex you, and I'm okay. And they're you're not invincible, and I'm I know, but these are basically.
Yeah, right. Sure. Yeah, right. Sure, I'm not invincible. Maybe something will slip through, but we'll see what happens to you first.
Yep, no, you can try. I would love to see it happen. And then I baited someone because they threatened me, and I'm all right, do it. I want a challenge. Didn't get to me, got to my Bruja friend. Oh, and caught in her protections, and I'm this isn't, I told you not to. I gave you a fair warning. I said, here you go. This is all the things that are around me. And I forgot to mention her. And she just was can I can I fuck him up? And I'm like, don't fuck him up that bad. Just give him a little, just give him a little, little spice. But yeah, okay. So what is a less common hot take that you have? Or do you have another point you want to talk about?
Oh no, it's just the less common point. So this one has a specific example for it, but it sort of expands out to everything. I get really annoyed when people do disservices to religions and what they actually are in their actual history. Most specifically and most commonly it's with Wicca. Saying that Wicca is older than it is, which I think it's like 1939 it was created, or something around there. But if you try to say it's like centuries old or it's based on all these things, you are doing a disservice to the actual work that it takes to create a new religion that actually takes hold and actually gets traction and becomes like a worldwide sensation that is globally recognized. Creating Wicca was a hard feat, and to say Gerald Gardner didn't do that, it was actually this centuries old witch cult, it is a complete disservice to Gerald Gardner. And the same goes for all Reconstructionist religions now. Like, we have to understand the actual history behind them. We don't have actual like documents of the full practice. A lot of it's Reconstructionist, meaning that no practice that we do, with very few exceptions being like Catholicism and possibly some ATR stuff, like really, really, really well documented stuff or stuff that's passed down orally, with very few exceptions. Nothing is going to be modern, nothing is going to be ancient, everything's going to be modern, and to say that it's not means that you haven't done your proper research on it and you are doing a disservice to all the people who helped either bring it back or make it in the first place.
I don't understand where the misinformation around Wicca comes from. Like, I don't know. Like, because I'm like, where did, like, this is common public info that Gerald Gardner was the founder of Wicca. Where did you get that he wasn't from? Like, what book are you reading? I want to taste it. Like, where is it?
So I haven't done a lot of reading into Wicca-specific books, but from what I remember and from what I understand, there is a trend within Wiccan books to go, because Gerald Gardner did say, I learned it from these witches in the woods, which is not true. There's never been any evidence to show that these people ever existed, but they go off of old man Gerald Gardner's word that I went into the woods and found these sexy 13 witch ladies who all wanted to have sex with me and make a new witch cult. So they take him at his word, and then it gets perpetuated, and then it becomes this thing. And because Wicca, and you have to recognize this, it's not a bash on Wicca itself, but if you are a Wiccan, you have to recognize that a lot of Wicca is cultural appropriation, and it's taking from other cultures without any credit. And so they just think, well, these things have been around forever. That means that Wicca must have been around forever. And it's like, no, they just took from things that are much older than they are. It doesn't mean that the thing itself is older. This part of the practice, or this specific thing that they do, that might be old. That might be centuries old. We might be able to find documents of it from centuries ago. It doesn't mean that Wicca is from centuries ago.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, a lot of people will argue, they're like, well, I can't find any research on their cultural appropriation, and I'm like,
you really can't? You can't look at the religion itself and look at an old man from the 1930s when cultural appropriation was like the hip cool thing to do, and all of the decades after that. You may have to stitch together. But you can't look at like chakras, which isn't even the right chakra system in the first place, the one that we're familiar with. You can't look at yoga. You can't look at like the ways that Hinduism views a lot of stuff like reincarnation. You can't look at Celtic mythology and all the stuff they took from that. The words that they use for the holidays are appropriated from Celtic culture. Like, is it Mabon or Mabon? I don't. Yeah.
Mabon. That's a Welsh god.
Yeah, like it's a Welsh god and it's not even connected to the stuff that they're connected to. Like, if you do 10 seconds of research into any of this, you'll see, oh, it was all just taken. Like, it's not a bad thing to use them as inspiration, but you have to recognize that they were taken.
I guess the conversation that I had with this person on Twitter was like, well, those things aren't an integral part of the religion.
Yes, they are! Yes, they are very much a part of it.
And they were like, I wouldn't say cultural appropriation. You can, like, appropriate things from the Celts because there's no power dynamic because they're both white. And I'm like, well,
that's not how that works!
The Celts were colonized, and, like, let's not gloss that over. But the other thing is, like, casting a circle, that comes from folk magic. Like, that comes from folk magic. And that's a thing that's existed for how long? And Wicca was like, I'm just gonna fuck with it a little bit and do this. And I'm like, oh shit, you just took that. There's some ceremonial aspects of it too that came from like I'm sure Alistair, like fucking Golden Dawn and Thelema,
I don't know. I know that, oh god, I might be getting this wrong. Georgina will have to correct me if I am. I believe it was that Gerald Gardner was part of the Golden Dawn and used their ceremonial stuff in Wicca. Like, it has other bases. And that's part of why I'm saying it's like this ancient druidic cult. I know it's wrong because you can know where Gerald Gardner got his stuff from. Like,
oh yeah, let's talk about how they basically watered Cronanos down to the horned god and kind of fucked with his mythology. So any Wiccan text you get on him, bad. Any Wiccan text you get on the Morrigan, bad. I know from experience because I've tried to find info, like old info, actual reliable info on this, and all the Wiccan sources dilute them down. And I'm like, Like, I thought, okay, Cronanos, not a god of fertility. Nope. He is not the god of sex. And Wicca was like, fertility, like sex. And I'm like, he's a god of death and wealth and wild. And I'm like, he's more closely associated with Hades.
Right. Well, it's the same thing that they do with all the lunar goddesses. Well, they put them all together. This is not just a Wiccan thing, just like generally. Everyone put all the moon goddesses together, including people like Hecate, and said, feminine energy, fertility, the womb. And it's like, if you know any of the lunar goddesses, you'd know that half of them don't even relate to any of that. Like, Artemis is not necessarily like a fertility, your womb kind of person. Hecate has like some connections, but she's more connected with death. So it's not necessarily that this should be like a fertility goddess. It's because, like, especially in that specific case, it's like Demeter and Persephone got put together with her into the triple goddess thing, and so like the harvest stuff got put in with the moon.
Did they put Demeter and Persephone together?
Well, so it's Demeter, Persephone, and Hecate all get put together as the triple goddess aspect, and so they're all like thought to be the three faces of Hecate, but they're not. It's just people like conflating them over time and forming them into one goddess. It's the same disservice that they do to Aphrodite, who was a war goddess, but people over time wanted to water her down and be like, oh, she's just a goddess of love, fertility, and sex and romance. And it's like,
didn't Aphrodite start a war?
Yeah, she started a war. Like, people forget this stuff.
I think that's interesting too, because a lot of people are like, forget the epithets of these Hellenistic deities. Like, I've heard people, and this, I talked about this a little bit in our deity work video too, which is over on Warrior Witch Nike's channel. Go watch it. I've heard people say that Hellenistic pagan deities are beginner friendly and easy to work with. And I'm like, what fucking book did you get that from? I'm like, do you read any of the mythology about the Greek deities? Like, right. Let's say mythology is written by humans. It's not to be taken word for word, but did you really read about like all these things that they did when people angered them and being like, this is good for me not knowing anything? I'm like, right.
Or like all the natural disasters that's come along with their little spats or their fights, or, you know, the monsters that come about from breeding.
The Trojan War.
Yeah, the Trojan War, straight up.
I'm like, they all took part in that shit. They all took sides. Like, they get and here's the thing, Hellenistic, like, people will say, like, well, they're divine, they're not gonna get involved in mortal issues. I'm like, you're right to an extent.
They won't necessarily always get involved in mortal issues, but they'll make their issues mortal issues.
There it is. That's it. Like, the Morrigan, if she did, I can't speak about it. She's around way too much for me to say that. Okay, moving on.
War gods will be war gods.
I'm like, I was gonna say that. I'm like, I shouldn't say that out loud because she's been around. But okay. I guess what's my less common hot take that I have? I don't think you need to practice every day. I guess that's my less common hot take. And I think a lot of people agree with that. A lot of people argue that saying you need to practice every day is ableist in nature. I don't agree. I think that certain paths require you to practice every day. And I know a lot of people like myself with disabilities who are disabled who still manage to do something witchy every day because it's part of their practice and they enjoy it. I just think that not even like, because like Georgina made a video about that, but Georgina's thelemic. So of course she's going to say practice every day. But I've seen people who are older who are like, if you don't practice every day, you're not a real witch.
Yeah, that's bullshit. I think if you don't practice every day, you won't get as good as fast. Like, practice requires practice. So, like, the more you do it, the better you'll get. But yeah, you definitely don't have to do it every day. And this is from my disabled friends, my chronically ill friends, like, just all categories of being in that. People saying that it's ableist to tell people that you should practice every day, from my disabled friends, is ableist itself, because you're saying that they can't manage to do a prayer, they can't do like a tarot pull, you're saying that they are so helpless, so ooh-woo infantilized that they can't possibly do anything during the day. Like, yeah, it's hard, some days it's gonna be more energy to even slip in a prayer, but like, you can still do it, and to say that they're incapable is ableist.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty similar because disability is a spectrum and it's not taking into account that there's going to be people all over the spectrum who can manage different things. So like, I may be able to practice every day with the disability, and some days I may not be able to, and some people may do every other day and they have a disability. Like, it's really like, you don't know. So assuming that like, they're disabled, they can't do that. I'm like, ooh, really?
Yeah, that's a big infantilization to put on disabled people.
There was another one I was gonna say. Oh, this one's a little bit of a hot take, spicy take. Intent is everything doesn't mean you should never use materials. It means you can pick up things from outside and give them intent and they will work the same.
Yeah. I put that under like personal correspondences because I try to stay away from that intent is everything type of thing. I put it more as you can use anything. Anything can be used, and it's important to put the intent in, but just having the intent won't get you all the way. You do need to do other things. It doesn't necessarily need to be material, but you need to do more than just think about it and be like, I want this. Like, okay, so your intention is to get this thing. What are you doing? Like, just sitting there and saying, I want a job. Okay, well, are you putting in job applications? Have you done a job spell? Do you have any charms? Are you going out and talking to employers? Like, are you doing anything?
The other thing is, I think we can see actions as like a form of spellcraft. But when we kind of look at these things, like, okay, and I wrote about this in my book, but you don't necessarily need materials for every single kind of spell. Like, let's say you're writing down, like, you want to love yourself more. You can do positive affirmations every day and enforce that self-love, but you don't necessarily need materials for that. But at the same time, if you're trying to go old folk magic, do a justice spell, do spicy little binding, you can't necessarily do non-material work because it takes away the sympathetic magic of it, like the sympathetic tools that you need, because sympathetic magically is basically, this looks like this, so this is that. And that's a big part of my spell work, is like, this looks like this, so this is that. And it's a metaphor and it helps. But unless you're doing like astral work, if you're trying to bind someone just by saying, I bind you out loud, and there's no tool, like, you can literally write their name on a piece of paper and use a string. And if it has that intent, it works. You can pick up a rock from outside and imbue it with the same intent as a clear quartz crystal, and it works. But if you're just sitting and being like, I am putting my intent into the universe to make this happen, you're making a wish. You're not taking energy or action to make it happen.
So my camera battery died.
No!
The 7 that go up the spine or whatever, they're not even in rainbow order. They're not in that color order. Like, nothing about what they're using is correct. And it's so frustrating. Just say that you're a Christian. Like, it's fine to be a Christian. I don't have beef with Christianity. But
when
to
you
use all of the concepts from it and then to say, but it's not Christianity. It's a lie.
Or hating on Christians while you're doing it. And I'm like...
Yeah.
Or the same thing with, like, let's talk about the fact that witchcraft houses white supremacists. And a lot of people left the Christian church because of white supremacy and came into witchcraft. And it's still, a lot of people like paganism and witchcraft as white supremacists. We can't ignore that. We can't sit here and say, that's not an issue. It's not my problem. It is your problem.
It's not us.
It's your problem.
God, my hair just bothers me.
That's okay.
The line I hate hearing is that they're not real pagans.
Oh, fuck, but
like,
they are.
They are pagans. You can't just say that they're not your people. It's like people who are like, well, they're not real Christians if they do this or that. No, they're still part of your church. It's the, like, good Christians saying that the bad Christians aren't really Christians, or vice versa. And it's like, well, but they are.
Do
people... You have to take credit for them.
Do people not know that one of the neo-pagan revivals inspired the Nazis?
Right.
Like, I think people don't know that is because there was a neo-pagan, and I can source this. I will gladly give you a source because this is history. It inspired, like, occultism in Nazi Germany, a neo-pagan revival in the 1900s. And people are like, there's not a problem with white supremacy. I'm like, a lot of practices and paths are rooted in white supremacy. We can look at Aleister Crowley. He was a nationalist. He was anti-Semite. That doesn't mean that Thelema can't be anti-racist, but it means be aware of your shit. Don't write it off because you feel like it isn't a problem. Don't use the westernized chakra like system without saying this is a westernized chakra system. Don't walk into Thelema or Aleister Crowley's works, because I love Georgina because she does this. She's like, yeah, this is white supremacy. Alt-right is here. This is a problem. She walks in and she says, hi, look at these things that you guys are ignoring. And I'm like, Georgina, marry me. And I'm going to tag her down below too.
I love her for that. Yeah.
And don't walk into...
We have the same issue with Norse practice too.
Yep, there it is.
So me and Georgina and Temp, we did an episode on the podcast that we do about the alt-right and the occult. So I touch on this more there. But where I live, there, Minnesota.
A Satru Folk Assembly.
They allowed,
I know.
Folk Assembly, which is an all-white, alt-right, pagan church. It's a Norse pagan place, but Norse paganism is, unfortunately, full of white supremacists, and to say that they're not real Norse pagans, like, that would be idiotic to say. They are absolutely practicing Norse paganism.
Or we don't claim them. We don't claim them. That's what people said about the QAnon shaman guy. They're like,
yeah,
we don't claim him. He's not actually Norse pagan. He's a Christian. I'm like, yeah, he's still wearing your symbols.
Use that, us, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and I'm sitting.
A lot of those symbols are taken for white supremacists too. Like, unfortunately, on his body is the Valknut and Thor's hammer.
Yeah.
The Valknut is not meant to be a white supremacist symbol. None of them are, but they're used very commonly.
Yeah.
He's wearing Thor's hammer, which is less commonly a white supremacist symbol, but they do like to use Thor's hammer.
Yeah.
My boyfriend has a Thor's hammer necklace. Many of my friends who are very strongly anti-racist have the Thor's hammer.
Necklace.
Some of them have, like, Viking tattoos. Some of them have runes tattooed on their bodies. They're not white supremacists, but unfortunately, if somebody only knows those symbols in the context of white supremacy, they're going to say, oh, God, they're a white supremacist. And,
exactly.
Stay away from them. We have to recognize that it's a problem.
It is about making people of all backgrounds feel safe.
Yeah.
Because, like, if you're wearing it and their only experience with it is on a white supremacist, they're gonna see that and they're gonna be, oh shit, that's a fucking white supremacist. Like, I don't want to be someone who walks down the street and scares a Jewish person or a person of color based on symbols on my body. That's just me. Like, I don't want that. That's an awful thing to ignore because you are actively making people feel uncomfortable and unsafe if you ignore it. That's what you're doing. You are continuing a cycle of oppression. Heal your ancestral trauma. Ooh, are those crows? No, they're birds. I got distracted.
Yeah, I mean, we just as a general hot take, we have to take responsibility for the worst parts of our community.
Yeah.
And to refuse to do so is to allow it to continue. And if you think, oh, it's terrible that they're part of it, it's terrible that white supremacists are part of some like occult spaces, but that's not my problem. You're allowing them to fester, you're allowing them to continue, and it's very much like, I don't like to use this phrase a lot because I always get pushback, but white silence is violence. By just being quiet about it and saying, well, it's not my problem, I don't have to talk about it. You do have to talk about it because they're part of your community.
It's complacency.
When you are silent, you are telling Nazis that you're allowing them to be in your space. You can't allow them to be in your space because then they'll never leave.
Yep. I mean, if we don't make those white supremacists and the alt-right uncomfortable in our spaces, then we are making them comfortable. Like, that's the kind of opposite. And people are like, well, I'm not a racist. And I'm like, everyone who's white is racist. You were born in a racist system.
Yeah, like there's always going to be stuff to unlearn.
And you have to unlearn it because otherwise you're just continuing a cycle of oppression. You're continuing a cycle that your ancestors upheld. You are continuing to uphold white supremacy because you were born into a colonized country where racism, every white person is racist. So when I tell,
My favorite argument that people try to use against me in all sorts of things, not just in racism, but in all sorts of, like, someone who's really shitty, who's, like, emotionally abusive or manipulative, or they're a liar, or they're a cheat, or they're a white supremacist, or they're homophobic. When I tell them, hey, just so you know, you're hanging out with somebody who holds these views, like, I just want you to know that. And they go, I've had this said to my face by people who claim to be, anti-homophobia, anti-racism. Well, they haven't done anything to me, or, well, I haven't seen any of that, or, well, I don't know, I don't think it's that big of a deal. And I'm like, you don't think it's that big of a deal to be friends with a homophobe, with a racist, with a liar, a scammer, a cheat? Like, you really think that it's okay, and that they'll just, like, well, they can't do it to you, or they haven't done it to you, so it's
They will do it to you. Like, do you think that if they treat do you think you're seen as different because they know you? Like...
Right.
Sorry, I'm probably going to cut that out because that was, woo!
It's just, whew.
That's spicy.
It's very spicy.
Okay. I feel like that's all our questions. Is there anything else you want to go over?
I don't think so. I think that's a lot of my hot takes.
That's a lot of...
I have other more mild ones on my channel, like, witch types and stuff.
Yeah. I'm going to link all of Nike's, social media below. My brain is starting to turn off. I'm gonna link all of Nike's social media below. Her YouTube, her Twitter, her Instagram. I would love if you guys go give her some love. You can go watch our deity work video over there where we had a huge conversation. It's like an hour long. This is probably gonna be an hour long.
Yeah,
but thank you so much for watching. If you stayed for the whole video, thank you. Leave a like. You can leave a comment if you have any questions, and subscribe and turn the bell on, but no pressure. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.